Dr. Chuck Betters. Welcome to Ask Dr. Betters. If you're not already a subscriber, I would encourage you to subscribe to Ask Dr. Betters. This way you'll have access to all of the questions and all of the answers that I attempt here, right here on Ask Dr. Betters. The videos are designed to match your question with what the scriptures have to say. Many of your questions, I think, require additional help. I think that for some of you who have really complicated questions, I can only give you a bare sketch of how I would go about answering that question for you, but it requires follow-up. It requires that you spend some time with a biblical counselor working these things out. And we do have a counseling opportunity for you. If you just go to biblical counseling, one word, biblicalcounseling.online, you can set up an appointment with a trained biblical counselor. I would encourage you to do that. Grief is a very difficult thing to address because we all grieve in a different way. It's very wrong, I think, for us to criticize somebody who grieves differently than we do. But grief is a complex issue. There's all kinds of aspects to why we grieve the way we do, how we grieve, how people respond to how we grieve, etc. We have a question here that is, again, very difficult to answer, but only to put it into biblical perspective, I want to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 18. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, it says that God gives these instructions that when you come into the land that your Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. Then he lists them. He says, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughters as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. Now, when Israel was about to enter into the promised land, they had to go through a variety of nations that practiced these magical occult uses of communication with the dead, communication with sorcerers and fortune tellers and soothsayers. And God warns them not to do this, that it is a violation against spiritual principles to try to communicate with the dead. Now, the reason for that is because Satan is an angel of light, and he can disguise himself in many different ways, and he can make look good something that is bad. He can make look acceptable that which is evil. Now, the reason I share this in the context of grief is because of this question. Connie wants to know, Dr. Betters, is it a sin to talk to a deceased loved one who appears in my dream? In my dream, I hugged my deceased son and asked him how he is, and he replied that he is okay. Thank you. Well, I must share with you, after we lost our son Mark, I had similar dreams. And I had similar communications in my dreams with my son. Now, that's different from what God is warning us about in Deuteronomy 18. We don't have control over what we dream. We do have control over what we do when we wake up from that dream. Because usually in those dreams, when we're talking to a loved one who is dead, we feel good in the dream, but then we wake up and then we feel bad because we realize it was only a dream. We don't have control over what happens in our dreams, but we do have control over trying to match the feeling that we had in the dream while we're awake. So for you to take that dream and then to, while you're awake, try to recreate that dream by communicating or attempting to communicate with your dead son, would be the practice of these witchcraft arts that we are warned against in Deuteronomy 18. Now, I know that when we're grieving, we feel as though our loved one is all around us. We can sense their presence. Certain things come to mind when we look at certain objects or pieces of clothing, or we go to a special place. We have a deja vu attitude or response because we're grieving. We miss our loved one and we want to talk to them. We want to be with them. We want them to talk to us because grief has entered and cut off any communication that we have with the very people we love. That's different. That is not practicing the art, the magical art of necromancy. Now, to sit down at a table with a fortune teller or somebody else, or even by yourself, and try to communicate with somebody who is dead, try to conjure them up, so to speak, I think would be the practice of that sin. To go to a gravesite and sit down at the gravesite, which I've done several times, and talk to your loved one, reacting to a memory that you might have. I don't believe that's sinful. I think that's part of the grieving process. But to try to bring them up, conjure them up, to establish a permanent type of day-by-day communication with them is to practice the magical arts, and it is a sin to do so. The reason it's a sin, I want to remind you again, is because Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. You're dabbling in the spiritual world where he dwells. Because Ephesians chapter 6 reminds us that we are surrounded in this spiritual world by darkness, by evil, and that we are to put on the whole armor of God, the chief weapon of which is the Word of God. So when the Word of God commands, or prohibits, I should say, something, then we are bound not to practice whatever it is prohibiting. In this particular case, it's the practice of necromancy. So grieve, miss your loved one, sense the loved one's presence, but don't try to conjure them up. Don't try to practice this magical art, because it will inevitably lead you down a destructive path. I hope this helps.